If you'd like to make your NFL games a little more interesting, you've come to the right place. It's the Even Money Podcast with Ross Tucker and Steve Fezzik.
Yeah, Vegas, baby, Vegas. It is the Even Money Podcast presented, of course, by DraftKings Sportsbook app, the greatest sportsbook app in the galaxy. By the way, talk about the best in the galaxy. This is an unbelievable week. I mean, we got NFL free agency going crazy. Steve and I may or may not get in some of our free agency thoughts a little bit later in the show. No matter what, though, next week, we will go over what moves these teams made and what we think it means for their Super Bowl future odds, for their season win totals. That will be next week's Even Money Podcast. Make sure you are subscribed and you listen to that one. I am, of course, Ross Tucker, former NFL offensive lineman. Most of you know that. If you check us out on YouTube, youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL, you can see the helmets and the game balls, stuff like that behind me. Now I got a bunch of media gigs, several podcasts. Means a great deal to us when you spread the word. We're still sort of the little engine that could, if you will. We're not with NFL.com or The Ringer or Barstool or any of those big ones. So really, really appreciate when you guys retweet, like, whatever on social media. I'm at Ross Tucker NFL. We are at Ross Tucker Pod. He is at Fezzik Sports and only at Fezzik Sports. Speaking of only, he is the only two-time winner of the Super Bowl of professional football betting. That is the Super Contest at the Westgate Casino. Again, check him out at Fezzik Sports. So over the next couple of weeks, Steve, it's going to be fun because we're going to get into our recap of all of our numbers since we've been tracking them back to 2016. I'm very excited for that in a couple of weeks. Next week, we'll dive hot and heavy into the NFL free agency. But if you have a betting podcast, if you have the Even Money Podcast, you got to talk about March Madness this week, Steve. I mean, I don't think I realized until recently. I mean, I always knew the tournament was a big deal, Steve. I didn't realize how big of a deal the betting was. I thought it was, hey, it's fun. It's college basketball. It's your bracket. Oh, my gosh. I didn't realize how big of a betting weekend this is.
Yeah, and the public money, this is one of the rare events where the public money can dwarf what the pros are playing, especially on the favorites, especially when we look at the late games. So you give me a late Friday or Saturday night game with a prohibitive favorite like a West Virginia, you know that every single public person in the book is going to go ahead and fire on West Virginia in some form, on the money line, on a teaser, on the spread, and all that liability accumulates. And they've been parlaying the favorites together throughout the day. So when you see a day, Ross, where the favorites are covering more than the dogs, by the end of the evening, the sports books have this huge liability on their books potentially if the favorites sweep in the final few games. And because of that, oftentimes you get a lot of value playing the underdogs late in the NCAA tournament.
Very interesting, Steve. I like that. Well, speaking of value, and I'm telling you, I didn't even realize all the different ways people are betting on March Madness. How about DraftKings, by the way? If you bet $4 on underdog and they win, you win $256 if they win. Pick any underdog, Steve. Put $4 on them. If they win, you get $256. Come on, you can pick out an underdog that's going to win. Just make sure you use the code Ross over at DraftKings Sportsbook. You guys know terms and conditions apply. 1-800-GAMBLER. You know the deal. Just code Ross, DraftKings app. Code Ross, DraftKings app. $4, $256. All you need to know. But that's not all you need to know. You need to know who to actually bet on. And for that, we are bringing in Brad Wachtel. I'm so fired up for this. Steve, I didn't even tell you this part of it, okay? I had a Division I college basketball coach told me this is the guy I should have on the show. All right, so we weren't sure whether or not the Division I college basketball coach would be allowed on the show. I didn't know if with compliance departments, if he could be on a betting show or whatever. He said, this is the guy, Brad Wachtel. Just reading his bio on Twitter at Brad_Wachtel, Wachtel, by the way, former men's basketball admin in the Big Ten, the Big East, and the AAC. Let's start with that, Brad. What does that mean for people that might not know? Former men's basketball admin.
Yeah, so I worked with the Rutgers University men's basketball team for 6 years on the coaching staff. I was in charge of operations, charge of our team managers, charge of our scheduling, basically all of the work that went on behind the scenes that didn't involve X's and O's. So I mentioned those 3 leagues because Rutgers happened to be in actually those 3 leagues. So it's not a lie, but Rutgers went from the Big East to the AAC to the Big Ten, and that's how I overlapped in 3 different conferences.
Oh, that's amazing. So it was all at Rutgers as they went through it. You actually had a busy job then, because as they would play different opponents, different leagues, you were about as busy as any basketball admin could have been.
Yeah, no, it was definitely a wild time, and Rutgers has had a history of some interesting things going on as well. Some that I'm not too proud of, and some that it was a very enjoyable time for me, and I love Rutgers University. I also went to school there. I was the head team manager for the men's basketball team, so I actually spent a total of 10 years working with Rutgers. So the fact that they're finally in the NCAA tournament, it means a great deal to me.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, they've had a really good year. We'll get to that in a little bit. So the first line on your bio says NCAA tournament projections. And my buddy, who's a college coach, who we won't name, he said this guy got 67 of the 68 seeds right. And then I was looking at your Twitter feed. You actually had 47. Was it right? You had 47 seeds perfect?
Yes, I had 47 seeds perfect and 67 out of the 68 teams correct. 47 is actually the best that I've ever done. But just like every single year, there are always some issues that you have with how the committee seeded teams and things like that. But for the most part, they've been doing a pretty good job.
Okay, so how did you get into this? I got to ask. And how are you that good? I mean, we got to know a little bit about the process here.
Sure. So it all started probably about 15 years ago after I graduated from Rutgers. I love the NCAA tournament. I always wanted to find a way to stay close to it in a way. Never got to experience it in my time at Rutgers. But I love learning about teams. I love all the information. I love just kind of knowing all the numbers and seeing where teams stand. And, I have my bracketology I call facts and bracks. I basically have an Excel file that lists all the information you need to know about every team's resume and profile. So I'm always updating the information on a daily basis, comparing team by team, quadrant numbers, net numbers, strength of schedule, key wins, bad losses, looking at every aspect of it and trying to put my mind in the minds of the selection committee and figure out what they're going to do, what they've done in the past. And always, things are not the same year in and year out. Things are always changing in terms of what the committee is looking at. So it's important to stay on top of that. But I feel like I have a very good feel for what the committee does, almost sort of like a pattern recognition. And I'm on top of it. And through my Twitter feed, I try to be someone that explains all of my decisions as well. There are plenty of people out there that could just put a bracket together. Okay, here's my projections and do an okay job. But I feel like talking it through is something that people would appreciate. And it's actually something that I wish the committee did as well.
Okay. So this is amazing on a lot. First of all, you're better than the guys that are on TV. They need to get rid of those guys. You actually have the experience of working for a program, and you're better. You nail more of them. I forget their names. I won't call them out, whatever, but you're better than they are. Number one. Number two, Steve, there's no betting markets on seeding, is there? There's no way we could just follow Brad on Twitter. Does anybody set lines for how many who will be the number one seeds and stuff like that?
Yes, they do. This didn't used to be the case, but a recent phenomenon has been teams have been listed over, under 4.5. You can bet them to go over or under, etc. So I wouldn't say it's a widely available betting market, but at a few select places like at DraftKings, you can bet on this now. And frankly, this is an area where obviously Brad should be able to shine and make lots of money because he's ahead of the curve. No one else is paying attention to whether Missouri should be a 6 or a 9, but Brad is.
Dude, Brad, I'm gonna follow you next year. We're gonna make a lot of money, buddy. This is awesome. I love it. So, okay, 67 of 68 you got. Who was the one you missed?
So I missed Louisville. I missed Wichita State. And I had Louisville in instead of them. Wichita State was actually my first team out. And the reason why I left them out was based on what the committee has done in the past. Their net was in the 70s. They only had one great win. And I didn't think it was enough to put them over the top. That being said, a lot of the 11 seeds that got into the tournament, many of them really weren't even deserving to be there in the first place. So I can't really complain about them leaving Louisville out of the tournament at all.
Okay, so I'm going to fire off some questions now, and then, Steve, I might pick your brain. I want to know path. You know, whether I'm filling out a bracket like a lot of our listeners and viewers on youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL are, but also for betting. Steve has taught me to not necessarily bet teams to win the whole thing, just bet them week by week, but still – I want to know path. So give me some teams that have some easy paths to the Final Four in your mind.
I think right off the bat, Gonzaga has the easiest path by far. You look at who's in their region and who they could potentially face in the Sweet 16. You're looking at either if the higher seeds advance, which personally I don't think will happen. You're looking at a Virginia or a Creighton. Virginia is a team who currently is going through a COVID spell. So we don't even know if they're going to be at full strength, which is why I think they could struggle to get out of the first round. As well as Creighton is a team that they've had some issues of their own with their head coach making, certain comments that, his players weren't happy about. So there could be a rift going on there. And I'm just not feeling either of those teams getting very far. So Gonzaga's toughest opponent will probably be Iowa in the Elite Eight. I think Iowa's a very good team, a battle-tested team from the Big Ten. But I do think getting to the Final Four and staying undefeated is where they will end up. Another team I feel like that has a relatively, I want to say an easy path, but the second 1 seed that has a solid chance is Baylor. If you look at how, if they start winning games and who they could end up playing, they might have to go through 3 teams in the Big Ten, like Wisconsin, Purdue, and Ohio State. Big Ten is a great conference, but at the same time, I think Baylor, I think they can survive that and get through that. And if they can play the way that they played before their COVID spell, they can definitely reach a Final Four. I don't want to say relatively easy, but they can do that.
Steve, let me ask you this, okay? Because I haven't filled out a bracket the last couple of years, but I'm doing one this year for the Dan Patrick Show. I'm one of their celebrity tournament guys. And I kind of already filled it out, but I could make some edits if I wanted to. How often would you win it or at least finish in the top quartiles? I don't get embarrassed on that show if you just did the lower seed all the way around, or the higher seed, whatever it is. You just did the favored team every round all the way through.
Okay, it's a great question, and it depends. How many people are you competing against? If you're competing against 8 people, you should go chalk, 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 chalk. If it was just a heads-up contest, you would take whoever was favored in each and every game. That would be optimal. Now, the bigger the pool swells, the less likely that strategy is going to win, because what's going to happen is that your bracket's going to look too much like 100 other people's brackets, such that whoever goes ahead and takes a flyer and takes an upset here or there, and one significant upset is going to be rewarded enough that they're going to be able to jump over literally 100 other people. So the answer really is all in terms of how large of a pool size are you competing against. Smaller pool size, go mostly chalk.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. All right. Well, so speaking of that, Brad, what about the opposite? What about teams that have really, really tough paths to the Final Four or making it far?
Yeah, I think number one is definitely Illinois. It's possible that they have to face Oklahoma State in the Sweet 16, who, in my opinion, was a bit underseeded. They should have been a 3, possibly even a 2. They've been as hot as any team in college basketball. The funny thing about that potential matchup is that's probably one of the biggest matchups I'm looking forward to in the NCAA tournament. Brad Underwood, the head coach at Illinois, is the former head coach at Oklahoma State. So there's a connection right there. And even if they get through that game, they could potentially have to face West Virginia, another Big 12 team. And when you're looking at conferences, the Big 12 and the Big 10 were the 2 best conferences of college basketball this year. So everything is based on matchups. You're not just picking, the league to win, but that's something to keep in mind. Those conferences are battle tested, and they can end up with the most teams advancing the furthest.
By the way, you can't really see it, but I'll put it up to this camera anyway for people watching on YouTube. I've got Oklahoma State in the national championship game against Gonzaga. I'm going with Oklahoma State under the Danny Manning, Carmelo Anthony theory of John Wallace theory of they have the best player, and Cade Cunningham's going to go on a magical run. They're not as good as Gonzaga, but I think they're going to go on a magical run to the national championship. That's like my big bet, Brad. What do you think of it? Having Oklahoma State all the way to the championship game.
I like it. I think the winner, I have Illinois winning it all, but I think the winner of that Illinois-Oklahoma State game will go to the Final Four. But I also think Illinois has 2 guys in Ayo Dosunmu and Kofi Cockburn, and they got shooters, they defend. Illinois is a complete team that I've seen play a ton, and they are hotter than Oklahoma State right now. So I think they have all the pieces to make a run, but I agree with you, especially for betting purposes. I think Oklahoma State, should they get by Illinois, they will go to the Final Four.
Speaking of seeds, I know you were talking about Missouri. Steve texted me before the show at Fezzik Sports. I don't know why I said that with his text. It sounds like his text message is at Fezzik Sports, but whatever. He wants to debate Missouri with you. So, Brad, since you are our guest, I will let you have the floor as to why you think number 9 was way too low for Missouri. Keep in mind, by the way, last week here on the Even Money podcast, Paul Roberts talked about how twice he bet against Missouri and they got killed by people. So I don't remember what games those were, Steve, but you remember that. Paul was like, he just faded Missouri a bunch of games. But go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think Missouri, I had them projected as a 6 seed. They ended up being a 9 seed. And the reason why I had them as a 6 seed was for multiple reasons. Number one, they beat Illinois this year, who is arguably the best team next to Gonzaga in college basketball. They finished over 500 against quadrant 1 opponents, which is very impressive to do. Finished 7-6. And I've always felt like I don't know. I felt like because 1 month ago, the selection committee came out, or the NCAA came out with their top 16 reveal. And Missouri was one of the teams that had a poor net. Their metrics weren't particularly great, and just in terms of their net. And I always questioned whether or not they would be seeded that high, because the committee tends to put teams with a net that are, in the 30s and 40s. They'll put them towards the back end of seeding, which they did with a 9. But in that top 16 reveal, they had Missouri as a 4 seed. So I kind of went off of that, and I'm like, okay, they're a 4 seed in this reveal. They have not played as well down the stretch, but their resume is not much worse. So for them to drop from a 4 seed to a 9 seed really, really surprised me. And I do think that their matchup against Oklahoma will be a good game, but I am taking Missouri for the reason of the fact that I think they're underseeded.
Steve, he's pretty good, man. What do you got?
Yeah, I think the whole debate is, are we talking body of work or are we talking recency? So Missouri's body of work, they're deserving of a better seed. How are they playing now? Vegas is unimpressed. Look no further. No one in Vegas is impressed by Oklahoma. That's a mad team that has no chance, no realistic chance to contend for this tournament. Oklahoma's an 8 seed. Oklahoma's laying 2 against Missouri. So the great thing about this is if you have a pro-Missouri opinion, you can go ahead and bet them catching an extra 2 points on top of it versus a very mediocre tournament team in Oklahoma.
Brad, do you have an overrated team? I guess Missouri's kind of your underrated team, or underseeded at least. Do you have an overrated, overseeded team?
Well, I do have a couple. I would say UCLA is actually one, and they're seeded as an 11, but UCLA actually could have been out of the tournament because they only had one win against another at-large NCAA tournament team in Colorado, which was also at home. So not that impressive. So now obviously they got to get out of that first 4 game against Michigan State, but I don't see them beating Michigan State. So that's one team. Another team that I will say is overrated by the public right now is Winthrop. I think they're going to be an extremely popular 12-5 pick because they have one loss on the season. They're 23-1, and they're playing a Villanova team who is without their starting point guard, who, they're not at full strength. They have not played well. And I just have that feeling like Villanova is still, they got a great coach. They're going to kind of go into that game as with that maybe underdog mentality that everyone's picking Winthrop. And I do see Villanova as a team surviving. One other note about Winthrop is they had the 342nd toughest schedule in the country. So easy schedule. They haven't played anybody. So that's one thing to note. They haven't played anybody, so it's hard to see exactly how they'll end up against a team like Villanova from the Big East.
So I guess the last question I have would just be, give me 1 or 2 upsets you like one or two underdogs, lower seeds that you think might pull it off for people that are in, pools where there's a lot of people, like Steve said, and you need to pick some. You can't just do chalk.
Yeah. First of all, I definitely like UC Santa Barbara over Creighton. That's one. And I also really like Georgetown over Colorado. That's probably going to be another popular one. As you were saying before, with recency bias, Georgetown has stormed through the Big East tournament. They could have beaten Creighton by 35 points. I really like what Patrick Ewing has done with this team lately, and if you look at what they've done to start the season, they were not very good. They were picked to finish at the bottom of the Big East. But Georgetown seems like a team that's on a mission, and I think they can get out of the first round, probably not much further, but I do see them upsetting Colorado.
Steve, it's interesting. You were texting me, and Brad, you can just listen to what Steve says here. Like you said, the individual, the betting pros, prefer the prop bets to the games. How many prop bets are out there, Steve, for these games?
Well, they're just starting to come up. Some of my favorites, you can bet yes, no, whether at Circus Sports, whether a team makes the Final Four, by example. But we're going to go ahead. We talked about different conferences. We're going to see props up. How many games will Big Ten teams win? Over-unders. How many games will the Big 12 win? Etc. One thing I'll caution everyone about, like the value of betting the big dance versus betting day to day. It's hard to set these lines day to day. The odds makers make more mistakes. I'm going to put you guys on the spot. We talk about Oklahoma State. Everybody loves Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State played Baylor in the Big 12 conference tournament. What was that line? What would you guess it would have been if you didn't see it, Ross?
Baylor -7.
Very good. It closed 8, but you could have had 9. So think about this. You've got Oklahoma State in your finals. You could have had that team +9 on a neutral site.
Yeah, that's a bummer. Interesting. Brad, this was fantastic. Everybody needs to follow Brad on Twitter at Brad_Wachtel. Like I said, the numbers 67 of 68 seeds, 47 exactly right. speak for themselves. But also, literally a Division I basketball coach said, this is the guy you should have on since I can't come on. And it's Brad Wachtel at Brad_WACHTEL. Brad, awesome stuff. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me, Ross.
There he is, Brad Wachtel. So before we wrap things up, Steve, there's been a lot going on NFL free agency. And we'll go team through by team next week. But we all know what's significant, and that is quarterback moves. So the two situations I really wanted to ask you about, number one, the New England Patriots signing like 12 guys, Hunter Henry, Jonnu Smith, Matthew Judon, including Cam Newton. Now, they're supposedly not done at the quarterback position, but it doesn't look like they're going to bring another veteran in. My guess is maybe they'll draft somebody. But your thoughts on the Patriots spending spree, including bringing back Cam as the presumptive starting quarterback?
Well, I love the fact that they're spending money, and I trust the Patriots to find value in those decisions. Remember, this is a team that had 8 guys opt out for COVID concerns last year. So already New England undervalued based upon that. Unfortunately, I just don't think that Cam Newton is going to ever become anything close to an average quarterback anymore in the NFL. He tried so hard. I mean, he ran the ball actively throughout the year last year and just was ineffective. I don't think that that's going to change this year. Below average quarterback is going to doom the Patriots.
Right now, what do you think their season win total would be?
Let's put it right at 8, 500 team.
You know what I want to do, Steve? When do the season win totals usually come out?
Usually right after the draft. Every now and then you'll see a sportsbook go rogue and put them up early, but just after the draft is typical.
You know what I want to do this year? We've never done it before. I want to guess season win totals with you. That would be fun. See how many. Now, I'm into this now that Brad Wachtel got 67 of the 68 NCAA tournament seeds, right? We should be able to do pretty well. I would like to see how many teams we could get within a half a game on.
You going over or under 8 for the Patriots?
I think that the line will be set higher than that. I think they'll be at 8.5 right now. And I don't know what I'll take. I think they got a decent chance to win 9 or 10 games. So I might go over. But they're not like winning the Super Bowl or 11 or 12 games. All right, what about my boy Fitzmagic and the Washington football team? All I know, Steve, is he's been playing well the last couple of years. Like if he just plays how he played in Miami, that's better quarterback play than Washington got all year last year.
Yeah, it's crazy. I'm reading in the media, hey, Fitzmagic, he might be better than the current Washington quarterbacks. And it makes me wonder, have these people watched an NFL game the last 3 years? Fitzmagic is good. Fitzpatrick was like the 5th rated quarterback in QBR last year. The only reason he got benched is because Miami wanted to see what they had in Tua and obviously felt they had to go that direction. Fitzmagic was playing very well, and I have him my 14th ranked quarterback. It's a bargain. You're only paying him $10 million a year. Now, I get it. Long term, he's not going to be the answer, and he's getting older. But huge upgrade for the Washington football team. A great move. There's going to be some teams in this quarterback carousel. It's like musical chairs. They're going to be left without a viable option, and Washington just got one for this year.
It's absolutely a terrific point. I love Fitzmagic. You know that. I think he's playing his best football, and I think he wants to start. I think he wants to win a division and start a playoff game, which I don't think he's ever done before. So I'm rooting for him. I think it should be awesome. What a fun episode. I'm rooting for you guys to hopefully subscribe to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast or Fantasy Feast, where we're going to break down all of NFL free agency moves from a fantasy football perspective tomorrow on the Fantasy Feast. Andrew Brandt will join us on the Ross Tucker Football Podcast to talk about the moolah, the money. Should be awesome. Make sure you got the DraftKings app on your phone. Throw the code Ross in so they know I sent you. Check out Steve on Twitter at Fezzik Sports. I am at Ross Tucker NFL. Good luck, everybody. Hope you guys win some money.
Thanks for listening to the Even Money Podcast. Make sure to also subscribe to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, The Fantasy Feast, Business of Sports, and The College Draft. All available at Apple Podcasts, rosstucker.com, or wherever podcasts can be found.